People go, I can't trust the New Testament because it was written by Christians. No, it wasn't. Stop. Stop. The people that wrote down the New Testament originally were Jews. They were not Christians. And Mike writes in and says, if only the truth of Jesus' resurrection can explain the spread of Christianity, how do we explain the almost equivalent spread of Islam? Muhammad died a natural death, never resurrected from the grave, and was viewed as a holy messenger of Allah. No resurrection was necessary to create the second largest religion on the planet, and a very close second. Yeah, good question, Mike, but there's a big difference between the spread of Islam and the spread of Christianity. Even Jordan Peterson, who has been so coy about his real religious beliefs, and by the way, I haven't seen Jordan lately. I know he's been sick. Pray for Jordan. I don't know if he's back doing his podcast yet. I haven't checked recently, but I haven't seen much of him. Anyway, a couple of years ago, Jordan Peterson said, well, I can tell you one thing I can tell you about the difference between Jesus and Muhammad. Jesus was no warlord. Muhammad, of course, was. You can see how any belief system could spread through violence, through conquest, through you better convert or we're going to murder you. You can see how that can spread and get ingrained, and that is how Islam spread. By contrast, Christianity did not spread through violence. Christianity spread, hold on to the Crusade objection, we'll get there. Christianity, in the first 280 years of its existence, you wouldn't be killed for not becoming a Christian. You would be killed, quite possibly, for becoming a Christian. This is not a good selling point. Christianity was persecuted, and yet it still spread. And it spread among people, at least initially, who were eyewitnesses to what happened to Jesus. They were Jewish. They were not. This fact, I think, is so often overlooked. People go, I can't trust the New Testament because it was written by Christians. No, it wasn't. Stop. Stop. The people that wrote down the New Testament originally were Jews. They were not Christians. The Christian writers who from early on were Christians were the early church fathers that came later. People like Clement and Ignatius and Polycarp. They come the end of the first century, beginning of the second century, that kind of thing. Yeah, those people were Christians from the get-go. But the people that wrote down the New Testament were all Jews. Even scholars are starting to admit that Luke was a Jew as well. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Paul, Peter, Jude, the writer of Hebrews, obviously a Jew, even though we don't know who he was. He's writing Hebrews, right? They're all Jews. They did not believe a man could claim to be God. That was blasphemy. They did not believe one guy would rise from the dead in the middle of time and save everybody. They thought we'd all rise from the dead at the end of time, like Daniel says and Isaiah hints at. But they didn't think one guy would claim to be God and rise from the dead. But what do they wind up doing? They wind up claiming a man claimed to be God and rose from the dead, and we're willing to die for it. We're going to go to our graves proclaiming this. And they didn't get sex, money, or power for it. They got the opposite. They were kicked out of the synagogue and then beaten, tortured, and killed. This is not a list of perks. It's really hard to explain how that world religion came out of Jerusalem on an empirical claim that Jesus had risen from the dead when his tomb was widely known. Christianity could have been stopped overnight by the Jews and the Romans, who obviously didn't want Christianity to emerge. That's what they were trying to stop by killing Jesus. They could have just gone to the tomb and taken out his body and said to everyone, stop all this nonsense talk of the resurrection. He's dead. They didn't do that. In fact, they came up with excuses. They came up with other possibilities. The disciples came and stole the body. Like they had a motive to do that. Why would they do that? To get themselves excommunicated, then beaten, tortured, and killed? There's no evidence for that. No. Christianity spread by the sword being used on it, not by it using the sword on others. The Crusades came 1,000 years later in response to Muslim aggression in the Holy Land. Why was Islam spreading all over the place? Because it was spread through war, through conquest. That's what the purpose of the Crusades were designed to stop. You've taken all these Christians' lands. You've taken the Holy Land. And the Pope and the government at that point were almost one and the same. We've got to get a bunch of fighters to go take this land back and free the Holy Land. And that's what the Crusades were about. Now, there were atrocities committed on the Crusades, but the initial rationale was considered necessary to regain lands taken through Muslim conquest. So it's easy to see how Islam could spread because it was spread through the sword, convert or die. It's hard to see how Christianity could spread while the sword was being used on it, unless a man really did claim to be God and rose from the dead. And that emboldened the early followers. The rest, of course, after they had died and passed on, then the rest of those people are just going on the testimony of what we find in the New Testament, those New Testament documents and those early apostles, what they wrote down, that was passed on. And those people, therefore, believed that this was good evidence that this had really happened. But they still persisted through all the persecution.